In this presentation, we will set up vendors and the beginning balances related to the vendors as we think about the beginning balances for vendors, people we owe. And then, of course, we're also considering the financial statement account of the accounts payable. Time to end the bookkeeping rage with Sage 50 Cloud Accounting. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars software. We're currently in the customer and sales section. We're going to be going on down to the vendor and purchases section. So we're now talking about vendors. That's people that we owe. So when we set up the vendors, then we want to think about setting up the vendors in terms of people that we're going to be owing in the future. And we also want to think about those beginning balances at accounts payable. Now we can do so by going to the vendors here and taking a look at the vendors. Let's go ahead and look at the setup process, however, within Sage, and then we'll jump back here afterwards. So I'm going to go to the File tab, drop down, and we're going to go back on down to the setup process, which is the setup guide. I want to go to the setup guide. So we did the customers, and now we're on the vendors. So the vendors, let's open that up and go through their little walk-up thing for setting up vendors. A vendor is an individual organization that your business buys products or service from. In this section, you can enter as many of your vendors as you want. If you don't set up all your vendors now, you can always add more later. And that's a key point because obviously we will typically be adding vendors as we make payments. And so that's going to be the normal way we would add vendors. But our large vendors, we want to add now and make sure we add the detailed information of it. And we need those beginning balances if we're starting the vendors from scratch or a new company file. So yes, I want to enter vendors. I'm going to say, yes, please, I'd like to enter vendors. And so we have our one vendor that's set up already because we had to set up that when we did the sales tax thing. Now we're going to set up the second vendor, which is going to be an add feature. So we're going to go to add the vendor. Now we're going to enter the primary fields here. So we're not going to enter all the detail into the vendors as well. But let's see what we have here. We got the Epiphone. So Epiphone, this is who we buy guitars from. This is our major guitar purchaser, major guitar vendor. And so I'm going to put Epiphone on the name as well. And then I'm just going to tab through this. I'm not going to fill out everything on it, but just tab through it. Of course, it is a data input field, standard type of information, similar kind of thing we saw on the customer side, or we might see it on employee side, contact type information. You don't need all this information for each vendor to post to it. So it really depends on what type of vendor or what the vendor is used for. What you need is the vendor ID and then the expense account down below. The ones with the asterisks are going to be the required fields. If you're talking about vendors that you're doing business a lot with, such as our major vendors that we purchase from for our inventory, then we probably want to have all the detailed information for it. If we're talking about other vendors, such as like the telephone company or something like that, that we just pay the bill at the end of the month for, we may not need all the contact information with regards to those vendors. So if we just tap through here, we got the contact, we've got the account number, we've got the mailing address, and so on and so forth. Copy to the address 1, and then we have the expense account. We do need an expense account, so I'm gonna select this one, and this would actually be going to an inventory account, typically when we are purchasing here. So normally, note that if we're making a purchase from Epiphone, usually it'll be driven by the form that we're going to be purchasing and the item that we're using. So if we're buying inventory items, that will usually drive the account that will be affected. But if we didn't have that, then this would then be the default thing that would be used, the default account that would be used when we do data input type forms for this particular vendor. So then we got the telephone, fax, so on, email, office manager, and account rep, and so on and so forth. And if we need more notes, we can put them down below. Again, notes are kind of nice if you want notes for a particular vendor, because I can kind of jog your memory on any kind of things that you want to keep in mind when conversing with an individual at this particular place. So that could be useful to have. I'm going to then the second tab is going to be the addresses, mailing addresses, and then history, and then the purchase information, the purchase rep, and the tax ID, and so on and so forth. Note the terms down here are kind of important as well, but we set the terms as the default, so I'm going to keep the default terms. So net due in 30 days will be typically the terms that we will have. So then I'm going to go back to the general tab, and let's save this. I'm going to say, save it, please. And that's the only vendor we're going to set up. I'm going to set up that vendor. I'm going to close this back out. And then we'll set up more vendors, of course, as we go. So now we have 2 vendors because one we set up when we did the sales tax information. That's the tax collector. And then the other is Epiphone. Is it going to be who we buy guitars from? And Epiphone, we owe them money at this point in time. So next one. Before you begin using Sage 50 to pay bills, we recommend that you enter the amount of money that you owe your vendors. We refer to this amount as the vendor beginning balance, appropriately named. The beginning balance can be entered as one lump sum or as individual purchases or bills. Do you currently owe money to any of your vendors? We're going to say yes, and so I'm going to just enter it as a lump sum. So I'm going to say, okay, let's go to the next one. Now you can enter the amounts you owe to your vendors. Click the Enter Vendor Beginning Balances button below. That's a nice Vendors Beginning Balances button below. I like that. Okay, so when the window opens, double click on a vendor name, then enter the purchase you made from the vendor. So I'm going to say, all right, let's open that one up. And we're going to be opening up the Epiphone to see how much we owe to this vendor. For that, I'm going to go to our balance sheet. This is our beginning balance sheet that we're entering the data for. If I go down to the liabilities, this is the only person we owe, and we have an AP of 15,000. So it's going to be that 15,000 we owe to this vendor. So I'm going to say, all right, invoice. I could put an invoice number 1010. Let's say, and then I'm going to make this as of prior to the current period. So I'm going to see if they allow me to put it in as of 12/31/19. And that makes sure that if they enter anything in there and it affects the income statement for whatever reason, it'll roll over to the equity section. So that's the plan there. So the purchase order number, I'm going to keep that as is, or blank. 15,000 is the amount. The account should be 2,000. That looks correct because that's going to be the accounts payable account. So I'm going to say, okay, that looks good. Let's save that. So I'm going to save that, and then I'm going to close that out. And that's the only one we need. So then I'm going to say, let's go next. And then it says Sage 50 allows you to set default terms for purchases you make from vendors. Here's what your vendor defaults are currently. So the payment terms are going to be in 30 days. So typically the net terms then for this particular vendor, when we enter that information in our bill, it's going to be 30-day net terms. That's standard. I'll keep the standard. Credit limit 5,000. Aged invoices by due date, not the invoice date. So when they do the aging report to see how old, past due something is, or if it is past due at all, it's going to be by due date, which is going to be after the 30 days, the net terms, rather than by the date that you put the information in the system. So that's fine. We'll keep that. Click the Change Vendor Defaults button to change the defaults. To keep these defaults, click Next. You can always change them later. That's great. Okay, so I'm going to say Next. And then you have finished setting up your vendors. What would you like to do next? We can proceed to the inventory setup, skip inventory setup, return to the main setup. So I'm going to just return to the main setup and just kind of stop here because that's all I wanted to do right now. And then we'll come back to the rest of the stuff later. So we're back to the main setup. I'm going to close it back out and just see what happened with this particular setup part of the setup process. So we're back in the vendor section. So we're in the vendor section. On the right-hand side, then we have our tax collector. Let's take a look at our vendor drop down here. If I go to view and edit vendors, there we have our two vendors. And so there's the Epiphone and there's the California tax collector. Now obviously if we needed to add more vendors, we can do so here. I can add more vendors here. So, and this would typically be the place you do it if you're going to add a whole lot of detail within the vendor, or you can add vendors when you populate the information, such as when you enter something like a bill. So if I was to enter a bill and say I want to have a new bill, let's make a new bill, then we can select that vendor for that particular bill. I can select these two vendors, or we can create a new vendor. And that's what we will often do with vendors as we pay a lot, because typically a lot of money, we have to pay a lot of people, because we pay for a lot of things. There's a lot of different vendors. So we might be making vendors basically as we set up the bills and make payments for it. Let's take a look at our forms now, see what happens with it, because we would think the accounts payable would be going up, but I don't think it has yet, so we'll have to do a journal entry for it. But let's double check. We're going to go to the reports drop down. We're going to go to the financials. That's what I'm looking for here. The financials, that's what I want. Balance sheet. Let's open up the good old balance sheet. Let's put it back on to January. So there we go, January. And then I'm going to open that up and take a look at the liability section. Nothing's in there. Nothing's in there as suspected. And we want something in there because there should be an accounts payable balance. Let's go back on over to our forms and take a look at the accounts payable stuff and see if anything is in there. There, I bet something is in there in the aged payables. Let's open up the aged payables, or otherwise known as accounts payable aging report, which I kind of prefer, but they want an aged payables. It's shorter to say that way. So in any case, there's the 15,000. We need to add that to the financial statements in the accounts payable. So let's do that with a journal entry now. So we're going to do our journal entry. Let's go back on up here and let's go to our tasks, and we want to go on down to a journal entry. So let's go down to the journal entry, and we're going to make this journal entry as of 01/01/20, the first day of the period. And it's going to be increased in the accounts payable, and the other side is going to go to equity. So I should, if I put the debit on top, then we're going to be debiting equity. So I'm going to debit equity. So I'm going to go down and find the equity account, which I think is retained earnings is the one we're going to have to be using here. So there it is, retained earnings. That's the one. And this is going to be beginning balance. And it's going to be for 15,000. And then we're going to be crediting the accounts payable. Accounts payable, which I think is 2,000. If I remember correctly. There it is, 2,000. That's the one we want. That's going to be a credit of 15,000. And there we have that. Whoop, one too many zeros. 15,000. There. That's better. All right, so there it is. Let's go ahead and save this then. I'm going to save this out. And let's post it and check out what happens. Let's go back on over to the balance sheet. We should see something reappearing now on the balance sheet, namely that 15,000. So let's go to the balance sheet and see if that is indeed the case. It does it. If it doesn't do it for you, you can go to the refresh button up here, and then it should refresh. And if it still doesn't do it, then it's probably a date thing. You want to check your dates. Do you have the dates in there correctly? If I double click on it, then we can drill down on it. There's the information. If I double click on that, then there is our journal entry. So looks perfect. I'm going to go ahead and be backing up these files, by the way. So if you wanted to jump to any point in the problem, you can restore the backup files to those points. So I'll try to back them up as often as possible. I may actually save the trial balance reports as well, so that you can check your numbers as you go through the problem with regards to the trial balance. Note the end result here down below is we're putting everything else to retained earnings. So once we get everything correct with these balances up top in accordance with our beginning balances, remember our objective is to get all the other balances correctly done. And then the equity balance has to be correct, because that's going to be, the double entry accounting system. That's how it works. So that's going to be it for now. Let's get out of here.